We are each other's light. July 5th, 2026, here we are. July 4th weekend. As I was being in the atmosphere of this talk and around July 4th, it is very traditional within Unity and New Thought teachings that we focus on the freedom of us having the power within our own being, the power of thought, the freedom of thought. We are these beautiful human beings capable of creating a world that works for us within our own reality. As we begin, many of us, many people are born into New Thought teachings. Others of us come to it from other faiths, from other backgrounds, or maybe no theological background at all. We just happen upon it. Many of us come to New Thought without giving up our religion of birth. That was actually how Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, the founders of Unity, envisioned it. That unity in itself is a way of life, not a dogmatic religious teaching, but a way of awakening to our own personal sovereignty. And so as I have been reflecting on this, what does it mean? What does freedom mean, truly? We can be free within our own selves, but are we truly free within this oneness that we talk about all the time? We are one in the spirit. There is no separation. If that is very true, then can we truly be free if others are not free? Is there a line to be drawn? Is it both and? There probably are elements of both and. We speak about spiritual freedom and the concept of knowing and living in that fullness and oneness. And we celebrate that and we revel in that. In the absolute reality, we believe that everything is in divine order. And I think that is probably very, very true. I have yet been able to prove that on my own, but I highly suspect that it's very true because it makes sense. The world is actually, when we have been shown, works not in competition with each other, but within cooperation of each other, is how nature works. Nature doesn't war within itself. Nature communicates widely. We are part of nature, and we are human beings. So knowing that in the absolute reality, or assuming that in the absolute reality that all is in divine order, and yet we see so much within our physical world that does not look like it's in divine order, we can only hope and pray that it is moving us further into that evolution of great awareness for every human being. Where do you find your place within that absolute reality when you still see pain and suffering around us? Now, I know that holding that thought of the goodness and allness of everything truly does help in the vibratory field of the quantum reality, right? We're not just focusing on what is happening right now in our own individual lives, but we want to expand out into that, into that allness. So while we are treating, as we speak about in New Thought, of treating a condition that is going on either within us or around us, while we're holding the truth, the divinity of the highest reality of that, if we're over here bleeding profusely, do we not go get stitches or at the very least put on a Band-Aid? Don't we also have to take care of the physical? Now, some people do have the power to do that spontaneous healing. Others of us have yet to attain that. So we live in both worlds, knowing the highest and the allness and the best. And we take care of what is going on right in front of us at the same time. So I'm going to tell you a little story here in just a moment. I can't remember if I was going to do this first or I'm going to do my little story. So I found this essay this week. Reverend Dr. Robert Brzezinski is the founder of New Thought Media, and he wrote this wonderful piece. So as those of you in this room know, or at least have heard me say many, many times, the co-founders of Unity, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, founded Unity in 1889. And that impetus for that work came from Myrtle Fillmore hearing that spiritual message. Remember, she was dying of tuberculosis, and the doctors told her there was nothing more they could do with what they had. And she heard that statement of, "You are a child of God, therefore you cannot be sick." And she took that to heart. And over the next 3 or 4 years, she went into the silence every day and set up a chair for Jesus and herself, and she forgave every cell in her body. And she lived many, many years, many decades after that. That was in 1889. In 1888, in Denver, 3 sisters, Nona, Fanny, and Althea Brooks, were teaching the teachings of Emma Curtis Hopkins. Now, I haven't taught a lot of Emma Curtis Hopkins. I know some of you in this room are familiar with her work. We need to spend more time with Emma. I want to go into so much history. But the Brooks sisters were teaching to people that would come and listen to them speak and teach in their living room in Denver. They focused on this sentence, "God is my health, I cannot be sick." Again, the same message that Myrtle heard a year later. That same year, in 1880, Melinda Kramer chartered the Home College of Divine Science in San Francisco and Oakland. See all that was going on? Denver, Kansas City, California, Japan, Russia. These teachings, this teaching was just sprouting up. It was time for it to be birthed. It was time for it to come forth. That we get to choose, that we get to pay attention to the quality of life that we live, and we get to choose a God within ourselves. immediate access, no intercessor, I'm saying that word wrong. The Catholics in the room know what I'm talking about. Intercessory. We don't need a go-between. God is right here, right now. That was going on. At the same time, all of this was going on. Congress passed the Scott Act, barring Chinese laborers who had left the country from ever returning, even those with families and property still waiting for them. They were here. They went back to China for whatever business they needed to go back to, and they were not allowed to come back, even though they had families and businesses. New thought was being born in exactly the years America was deciding state by state and law by law who got to be free and who did not. And at the same time that this was going on in our history, this surge of New Thought teachings was coming alive. So where we are today and things that we are seeing in our world are not new. If you listen to Heather Scott Richardson, the historian, I'm a history buff, so I really enjoy her work. She says, we go through these things. The United States goes through tremendous things about every 50 years we evolve through. Dr. Brzezinski says that all of this that was going on was not a coincidence worth only a footnote. It is the water the movement has swum in since founding, largely without naming it. Emma Curtis Hopkins, Myrtle Fillmore, Melinda Kramer, Nona Brooks, these women built something genuinely radical for their moment. A theology that told women they could speak with spiritual authority in an era that barred them from the pulpit, the ballot, and most professions. That achievement is real, and it deserves to be honored without qualification. But the freedom they were claiming for themselves was being built inside a country actively narrowing freedom for others. Through Jim Crow statutes hardening into law, through the Exclusion Acts targeting Chinese immigrants, through a Reconstruction that had collapsed a decade earlier and left Black Americans facing a new architecture of control dressed up as order. New Thought founders were not the architects of that narrative, but they weren't outside it either. And the movement has rarely asked what it means that its central claim that consciousness creates reality was formed in rooms that did not have to reckon with those whose reality was being denied. Does that make sense? As New Thought was being formed, so much of the focus was on that individual and personal spiritual awakening, on that personal healing, on that personal prosperity. And from what this essay talks about and what I have seen in the histories of New Thought teachings, it was decades, a century before New Thought actually started to take itself outside of its own individual little healing and enlightenment bubble out into the world. When I was educated in Unity, at Unity Village, we did not have a spiritual social action team like we have now. It has only been in the last, I would say 20 years or so, give or take, that as a movement, we are not only looking at that personal, individual development, but also out into the world where we can be a part of the healing and the awakening of the universe. So I give you a little bit of that history, and I hope it wasn't too much, but I felt it so important on this weekend to know a little bit of our history, of our roots within New Thought, and to take that to a place of, okay, so now what? There are many teachers who are teaching right now, and Kelly and I were talking about this before the service started, of how we're experiencing the world and the energetic changes that are going on. I was fine this morning, and I am fine, but as soon as I walked out my front door, I picked up an anxiety that was palpable. And I went, whoa, what is that? The universal energies are at work. Some of us pick up on that stuff more than others. Some it's still going on, whether you experience it or not. And we're going through a time of a great shift within. I don't even have words really to put to it other than the evolution of humanity, but it's even more than humanity. It's a great awakening. Just like in the late 1880s, where we had all of this teaching popping up, we're feeling much of the same thing now. If you don't feel it, that's fine, and I don't want you going around feeling like I do sometimes, so you be you and I'll be me. But know that we do have a responsibility. So Robert Brzezinski and David Alexander, both ministers out of Centers for Spiritual Living. Robert founded New Thought Media. David is an author and a minister. So this comes out of their thinking. The New Thought movement has to stop treating personal manifestation as the end point of spiritual maturity and start treating collective liberation as its natural continuation. Collective liberation, collective spiritual liberation. Consciousness that creates experience for one person and stops there is a philosophy of comfort. Ooh, you're here. That's a strong statement, right? Now, I'm not saying that what we have done in our past, in our history, is wrong, because we needed, each of us that chose to show up in this world, to find ourselves. We have needed this time to find out who we truly are and to build our own spiritual strength so that we could be here for this time. Perhaps for it to be any other way would have been premature. But now, many people on planet Earth, New Thought or not, this is not, New Thought was monikered New Thought because it was a new thought for that time. Because people weren't thinking outwardly about that. But New Thought was never a new thought. It's ageless, it's timeless. Consciousness that follows its own logic all the way to the systems that shape who gets to be free is something closer to what the founders may have actually been reaching for, even if the language and the courage to name it fully had not yet arrived. Maybe the courage to name it, but maybe not even the realization to name it, because this inner work had to be done. This inner work had to happen. A theology that only asked what I can create for myself was never going to be enough to answer what an entire people had been denied.
Hear, hear.
Right? And we find ourselves very much in this same kind of place today. So much more to say about that. From Rumi, if everything around seems dark, look again. You may be the light. And it's so important, in my opinion, and most of you in this room know, probably, if you pay any attention to me on Sunday morning, where I fall on the worldly spectrum of being a humanist, of caring about the treatment of all people, of fair and equitable treatment of each of our fellow human beings in kindness and in love. That doesn't mean that we don't need rules and laws, but it means that we need compassion and care so that we can be not only our light, but each other's light. One of the things that I've read this week and listened to, this may have come out of Heather Cox Richardson and Dr. Joanne Friedman, both historians. Their podcast, What the Heck Just Happened, is so good, and they're so wonderful about giving us historical context. This is George Washington's chair. The United States of America claimed their independence, according to my understanding, actually on July 2nd. But the papers were signed on July 4th. That's in the research that came up while I was looking at things. And that was in 1776. The Constitution, the United States Constitution, was signed on September 17, 1787. And for 3 months, the Continental Congress sat in a room, seemingly almost just consistently around the clock. They worked on our Constitution, because in that time period of July 1776 and September 1787, this fragile republic was fraying. It was new. And you know, these guys that were doing this, they were not very old. We talk nowadays about people that are still in their early 20s, their frontal lobe hasn't completely closed or whatever it is, right? These guys were not much older than that. They were not our ages sitting in this room. They were doing the best with what they had to work with. I truly believe that they were doing the absolute best that they knew what to do. So, this quote, George Washington sat in this chair. President George Washington sat in this chair during the Continental Congress and all of the discussion around what the Constitution should be. And Benjamin Franklin would sit in that room and watch George Washington and see this chair. All right, so here's the point. I don't know how tall George Washington was. I don't know how he saw this when George was sitting there, but hey, wouldn't it have been blocked? But the point is, I have often looked at that picture behind the president without being able to tell whether it was rising or setting, the sun. But now at length, I have the happiness to know that it is a rising and not a setting sun. That is who we are. That is who we are. And if you're interested, I can share with you a little bit more of the history around this quote afterwards, because it's really kind of quite fun. But to look at this chair throughout that process, and Ben Franklin, knowing what we seem to know about Ben Franklin, again, I wasn't there, this man of great insight and great care, to know that the work that they had just done was a rising sun on the United States of America and the great hope. And we tie that in together with 100 years later, not a whole lot of time, that this new thought awakening was happening in our country and beyond. A new arrival, a new rising, and that is where we are now. Oh, so how does this apply to you? Be good stewards of your own personal faith. Be good stewards of your own personal awakening. And let us each, with everything that we are already doing for the world, expand this teaching of new thought, sovereignty and healing and self-empowerment. Let us hold that even higher and brighter for every human being on planet Earth. Stay open, stay teachable, stay awake, and be the light. And so it is.